Hello and welcome to this episode of Trident Talks. I'm Rosie, a senior associate over at Trident, and I'm delighted to be joined by Denzil, who is the CEO and one of the founders over at Dimium. Now, before I jump in, and I can definitely ramble on about an introduction, I'm sure the listeners would much prefer to hear from yourself a little bit about your experience and what really got you to this podcast today.
Yeah, Rosie. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. For me, this is a journey that started about 20 years ago. I was actually looking at the kind of the calendar of events last night, and this has been an idea that I'd been thinking about since about 2006 when I was at Juniper. So my career, I ended up here in Silicon Valley in the early 2000s, and I was fortunate enough to join one of the earliest VPN companies, which we sold to F5 Networks, and that kind of became their stack. Ended up after that joining another one called Neoterras, which was acquired by NetScreen, Juniper Networks, and it was at those days at Juniper where we're selling network and security gear in the stack, and it had this feeling that everything as you move up the stack gets commoditized, and I would go and talk to people. I was like, to different CIOs, et cetera, when we're doing all these executive briefings, et cetera. And I would ask, I'd say, look, hey guys, I think someday all we're going to care about is data, and all this other stuff that we're talking about right now is going to become commoditized. What do we think we're going to do down the road? And I would always hear things like, well, Microsoft's going to come along with, DLP, and they're going to solve that. And that was kind of my earliest indicator. Well, that it's too early. Let's wait. Yeah. So then, my career progressed, ended up at companies like Aruba Networks, which obviously is now HPE. And then, watching what was going on with ASPs back in those days, pre saying everything cloud. I remember watching, everybody having projects, where, the talk track back then was nobody's, financial services, banks, they're never going to use other people's computer, this ASP thing. And then I'd hear every single company had a little project with a company called AWS. And that was the time I ended up joining some of the early folks at Zscaler and had helped build Zscaler. And my role turned into building emerging technologies over there, which was the new toys. And the first one that came out of my group was called Zscaler Private Access, their SASE ZTNA solution. And that was in an effort to address the concerns around VPN that were there. How do we stop lateral movement? How do we reduce risk on the network? But again, still talking network. Obviously, Zscaler IPO'd. I had a chance to help a couple other companies. Another one was an identity SIM that was bought by Cisco. And then, in about 2022, I had a chance to start putting my time and effort into Dimium. And where we're focused is, imagine everything else is commoditized along the way. How do you build a security stack that's focused on protecting data itself? And so that's kind of the journey that's led me all the way here. A little bit of my background of how I ended up here.
Awesome. Well, look, I'm really excited to get stuck into this, kind of learn more about what you've been building and obviously your experience as well. I guess my first question is, you've taken kind of 20 years to get to, I guess, this point. Obviously, it's a fantastic founding story. You've been through multiple kind of exits, acquisitions, which is great, what you want to see in a founder, right? Why do you think now is the time, or 2022? Why was that the time?
Yeah, great question. I think, we've gotten to a point where we've had breaches that have been happening left, right, and center. Actually, one of the events that actually caused me to really think about this is I had friends and family members that were affected by breaches. And, if I go back to kind of even those Juniper days, it was actually around that time, when we used to talk about, network security and everything, we used to talk about breaches and data loss and everything. We would always talk about brand loss, brand defamation, revenue loss, that type of things, based on a breach. But what I witnessed is the right kind of data can be loss of life too. There were a couple intelligence breaches that happened in the US with data. And, what that turned into is, imagine if you're in counterintelligence and suddenly your entire existence is now public knowledge. And suddenly you have mercenaries coming to hunt you and your family. That's what I've, had a chance to witness through, friends and family members. And, that's the severity of data loss. And, right now, we don't have any technologies that can stop that from happening. And I was fortunate enough. A few months back, I was at an AI security conference, and giving a talk over there. And where I actually started was kind of asking the question in the audience is, who here has free credit monitoring? And about every single person raises their hand. And why? Because a breach happens. The response we have is, well, let's monitor what happens outside of outside the far end of this. And instead, what we want to do is, I hate technology that tells you your hand's been burnt. I like technology that says, I stopped your hand from getting burnt. And we have not had that for data. So we've been building that. And then along comes AI, right? In the middle of us building, and suddenly AI needs different levels, different type of data access, and the data stacks that exist today cannot match pace with AI. And to give you an example of what I mean by that is, if you want to go and build an AI agent today, you can do that, and an AI agent can do things at a phenomenal pace. But when you need to bring your data to the table, that's where things tend to crawl. Especially if it's regulated, financial data, healthcare data, that kind of thing, we tend to crawl because a human has to go and do the work. Especially if we need to use data from multiple places across the organization, someone has to go and do the work to get the data, to bring it back, sanitize it, create the right lens of data, ETLs, etc. Then we can finally connect it to AI. And so we can do something with AI that, is measured in, seconds and minutes and days. But then when you plug in the data element, it crawls at a human pace where you need days, weeks, months to bring the data to it. And so imagine is, what about if we could have data match pace at the same pace as AI with security and everything embedded, so it closes all of those risks that we've had in the past? Now we suddenly have the ability to use data anywhere without the risk of exposing all that data and without the business latency that exists. So the challenge is, that people are really focused on today is, well, I need to use AI, and we'll skip over a little bit of the risk, but now the risk is starting to catch up with people. So what we've been working on in terms of protecting data suddenly becomes incredibly relevant because the world needs something different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it seems like obviously this seems like to be quite a fundamental problem, and it seems to be affecting, like you said at that AI summit, if everyone's kind of put their hands up saying I've been impacted by this, it's impacting a lot of kind of the US and globally as well. Why do you think it's taking kind of Dimian and yourself and to this point to think actually this is an issue we need to fix? Obviously, data security is a huge space, right? There's a lot of different companies out there, and maybe it's too generalist to say data security, right? There's many different kind of capabilities within that. Why do you think kind of now this switch has happened, and why not before?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it comes back to how data has been architected on a lot of organizations, right? We're building off of patterns that have existed since the 90s, the early 2000s, right? We have our data in one location. If we need to use it somewhere else, we create copies of data, everywhere else. And so, I was talking to one of the executives at one of the big database companies, and they shared with me that their customers have an average of 18 copies of any piece of sensitive or regulated data. So if you think of just how business process works today, we need to use our data. Let's go get a copy of it, sanitize it, and then we'll put it up as another copy to work with. The behaviors that we use kind of create that data sprawl, creates that difficulty to control and manage data. And about the best solution that we have today is, well, let's put it in a virtual data lake. Let's take all these things and let's centralize it, cache in one location, use it in this new spot. And where we've been focused is a little bit different. What we're trying to do is say, look, you never have to lift and shift or move your data. Keep it exactly where it is. Let's keep your one spot safe. And if anything comes in to use it, we can basically bring out the data instead of letting somebody in, so that we can reduce that surface. So kind of if I were to give you a little bit of analogy of, the way it works, if we think of in the I want to say in the past, because I feel like nobody walks into a bank to go see a teller any day anymore. You go to an ATM. But imagine if you were walking to a bank to go and see an actual human and to go and
Mhm.
get some money out. And I'll use dollars in this example, right? So you want to go get $200. You go see the bank teller. The teller is going to, number one, vet your identity to make sure you are who you are. They're going to look up your account for entitlement. They're going to have the asset in a secure location like a cash drawer or a vault. And if you're allowed your $200, they're going to grab it, hand it across the counter, and say, "Here you go." Right? Makes perfect
Yep.
sense. If you walk in there wearing a balaclava or a ski mask, they're probably going to treat you a little bit different. So we know behavior is a component of that.
Mhm.
What you'll never hear, though, to kind of look at it in different ways, you'll never hear that teller say, "Hey, congrats, you're allowed your $200. Go ahead and walk into the vault. On the left side, there's a stack of $4 million. Just go grab your $200 off the top." Right?
Yeah.
It's comical in a bank setting. But guess what? If we switch vault to data silo and money to data, it's exactly what we do in the data world. If you need data, and when I say you need an agent, an application, an analyst running a BI tool, what's the first thing we do? We VPN them in, and unfortunately, we built a lot of the VPN stuff that makes connectivity great, but that's where all the risk lies. We're bringing them into the vault, and we're saying, "Here, now you're in the vault, have fun." And how do
Yeah.
we not expect there to be problems, right? We put them inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we're trying to do is bring that concept of the teller where we never have to bring anybody inside anymore. When you ask for the right thing, it's going to be brought out to you. And
Mhm.
so think of, it's the information in the right lens. And this is what I think we really need to get to, as an industry, as a whole, is how do we stop people from getting inside where all the sensitive things are? We if we think on the network side of the world, we figured out how to zone things and create isolation and separation, et cetera. But on the data side, we really, really haven't yet. About the best we have is ETLs to say, "Hey, let's bring out a copy and put it somewhere else." And that's, you lose control. As soon as you've done that, you've lost control of the data. And
Mhm.
now when we go into an AI centric world, so if we just kind of look at that as a foundational data problem, when we go into, the AI side of the world, it's even more challenging. So
Mhm.
imagine a problem. You're a manufacturing company, and these are the types of problems that we get to help people solve. Imagine you're a manufacturing company, you're manufacturing a product, and you're having delivery issues where, let's say logistics, semi trucks are coming to pick up orders and they show up at the factory and the orders are not ready and built on the equipment that's there. So you have supply chain, logistics problems, customer satisfaction problems. So you say, well, actually, AI is the perfect solution for this. Let's build an agent to watch our manufacturing ecosystem to stop that from happening. Okay, we could do that. Now, you're a snowflake shop. Okay, let's imagine they're a snowflake shop. So using kind of the latest and greatest tools that are on the market. So you've taken your manufacturing data, you're syncing out to Snowflake at a periodic basis, and you're like, "Okay, I just want to point my agents to that." Well, here's the challenge. That is real-time OT data that is running on manufacturing equipment. A moment in time sync to Snowflake doesn't give you the data that you need. So how do you safely get to that data and connect to that data in real time? You can't go and cache a copy of it somewhere else. You can't take the original data approaches that you have. You need a real-time way to go and retrieve it at access time. And these are a lot of the challenges that kind of the traditional data ecosystems can't solve today. And, honestly, a lot of the industry is looking at how do we switch to, kind of more real-time data fabrics as well that can retrieve in real time, which is very different than what we've done before as an industry.
And like you said as well, like data is this huge commodity, right? And I think if we're thinking about adversaries or hackers, I don't really like using that word, but hackers, they're really utilizing AI at the moment, right? I think that's kind of moving with the space, and you've got to have these kind of companies like yourself and others out there touching different areas of cyber that are very much kind of AI native as well, and keeping up with this agentic AI world, which has kind of boomed over the last like 18 months or so.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, when we look at our adversaries too, there's also a set of asymmetric values. What we're willing to do and versus what our adversaries are willing to do are very, very different, right?
Mhm.
Think of the saying, I won't stoop that low, right? Well, we behave different, so we have to be even more vigilant, right? I
Hmm.
remember, when Worm GPT first came out, that was like right at the beginning. And why? Because there's a benefit of using the technology for nefarious needs. And why? Because there's financial gain out the other side, right? People are going to find a way to eke money out of this system. And, how do we protect? Like the one thing that you do have control over is your data. And I think the concern with AI now, if we bring kind of why we're also focused on the security side of data going to LLMs, the kind of think of foundational frontier models. The challenge that you have in that world is one overexposure can be it, right? In the past, if you're going back to, like you said, quote unquote hackers, if
Hmm.
someone were to break in and steal your information, it was either a targeted event where they're doing something and they have a plan,
Yep.
or they found it and they're going to try and monetize it on the dark web, right? Your exposure was if someone is willing to go and find it on the dark web to go and get a hold of that data. Now it's different. One accidental exposure and your information can go into public domain for the entire world. And I think as an industry, nobody has an answer on how do you actually claw that information back. And I think that's one of the biggest risks is, well, number one, don't let your sensitive data, your regulated data go to these foundational models because you're losing control over the data.
Hmm. As someone that's obviously not kind of in this space in the sense that you are, or CISOs or anything like that, it feels like quite kind of a scary thing that can happen, that these people or hackers or adversaries or even just kind of human mistake, right? Or just human action can be kind of actually quite threatening, I guess you could say. Um, I wrote something down here that I kind of had through doing my research. So you're really kind of positioning yourself, and we have kind of touched upon it in the conversation already, as the last layer before any request. And we've kind of started touching upon that you're almost, it sounds like, redefining where you're sitting within the security stack. Do you think you're also kind of redefining almost like a new category within this data world as well?
I I believe so, yes, because I think it's fun when you start to look at models, like the different analyst models, when you don't fit into their models, when it tends to break them. I think there's always a chance for, you're either doing something crazy that doesn't matter at all,
Yeah.
or you're kind of hitting on some patterns that cross the different things that are there. I think it's the same thing we went through at Zscaler, right?
Hmm.
Is there wasn't a category for secure web gateway, SASE, ZTNA, all those types of things, but it was a technology that was needed.
Hmm.
And I think we have the same thing here as we've been building technology over the years. And I think specifically when we focus on security, we've moved up the OSI model, kind of that model defining the network, and we've landed at layer 7. So Zscaler, Palo Alto, Netscope, Cisco. Everybody's taking network streams and trying to look inside, see what's going on. And we kind of hit a ceiling when it comes to the network. And our premise has always been, well, data goes beyond just the network that's there. It's really a language that comes after that. And, if you look at when things came out, like, the content-based firewall. So think of when my old colleagues from Juniper spun out and they built Palo Alto over there. It was about the content-based firewall to look what's inside, what user, what application, et cetera. And we're moving up the next layer. You need context anymore. You have to understand the context of language. And that's where we're really focused, is on the language. Is, AI is asking for data. Well, what data? What format? Why? For who? Etc. And if you think of, we kind of naturally do this as humans. You ask me a question, I sit here and process for a second, and I think of what I say based on the context. And we have to do the same thing with data, and specifically for AI. And this is, I mean, look, what powers AI? Context, which is, the data that comes with it, the tooling, and the model. And if you can secure all of those areas and bring the right security to it, you can actually have a secure experience with AI without the risk. But you have to be able to understand the context of language. And so when we say data, it's more really even understanding the context of that data that is there, right?
Well, I think one of my first questions that I asked you before joining this podcast today was, so are you DSPM, or kind of where do you fit? But if you're almost like redefining this kind of category, or creating something, I think it's going to be kind of huge. Like I said earlier, data security is too general. Like we can't say that with a lot of these organizations. Are they a data security company? They're an AI security company. That's just not really the cyberspace anymore, especially with all the kind of startups coming up every day or whatever it is at the moment. I think for our listeners, and as I mentioned before, a lot of them are CISOs and a lot of customers or just kind of other founders in the space. And you obviously just jumped off a call with a customer. What would the feedback be? What kind of gives that customer maybe like the aha moment? Oh, I need this.
Yeah, look, I think that's, it's been fun as we've been building the company, kind of talking to different CISOs and CIOs of organizations. And, you know, there's a CIO we're working with. Obviously, I don't even want to give the vertical, but imagine very regulated vertical, large companies, look, he will stand up and say that, hey, 8 months ago, I didn't realize we're going to run into these problems. And what are these problems I'm running into today? I'm having pressure from my board that I need to roll out AI to the entire organization. So what choices do I have? Well, I can go buy, OpenAI's solution and roll it out to all my employees, and I'll buy the enterprise version of ChatGPT so I'm safe, right? Well, then they suddenly realize that, we're leaking data left, right, and center. And if we think of why, they give ChatGPT to their employees. It's now a sanctioned IT sanctioned tool that they have. So take a salesperson. They have Salesforce, a sanctioned tool. Though, they want to use the AI to be productive. So they'll go get a report from Salesforce on their customers. They'll go throw it into ChatGPT and say, hey, find me some new customers, craft me some emails, whatever they needed to do. Mm-hmm. The act of those two things together suddenly create a shadow data problem where it leaks data to OpenAI and it starts pooling around their models. Now, the controls that the enterprise feel like they have in place is, well, ChatGPT, OpenAI is not going to train on my data. They're still going to store the data. The data still exists. So you've now have data that is sensitive, regulated, pooling outside of your organization in a place where you no longer have control over it. And then suddenly it's the holy cow, guys, hold on, all stop. We got to figure out we're leaking data all over the place. Now, what do we do to address that? These are the types of problems. So we can help address that problem on day one, which is, think of it's a data leakage problem right off the bat. But it's not enough to say block it. You have to still figure out how to enable it. So I always, I dislike technologies that don't make people's lives easier. Security should make people's lives simpler, not harder. So what about if you could close that where you have a better experience and it actually makes that, the entire experience better for users? So we can go in there and basically help reduce that risk right off the bat. And then, another example is, another company working with is same thing. They've rolled out ChatGPT, Claude, it doesn't really matter which one, and they're vibe coding. Okay. Which everybody's doing today. And, the manufacturing company where their trade secrets are in their manufacturing process. And guess what they're developing code around their trade secrets. Mm-hmm. And suddenly when they wake up, it's like, holy cow, we've been leaking our sensitive, secret formula via code to the foundational models. And going back to that problem of exposure, if that is accidentally used for training, now suddenly their trade secrets are public domain for the entire world going forward. And so guess what? They end up with the panic, all stop, we can't do this. And so, people have been rolling out AI because, it's the right thing to do, because if you don't, your competitors are going to get left behind. But now they're all the security related things are catching up with people. And so what we've always been focused on is how do we make, all that security stuff something you don't have to worry about whilst you get all the productive gains from AI.
God, I need to tell my founders about this whole ChatGPT thing. We've upgraded to enterprise, like business, but obviously not fully protected. So that's definitely feedback I need to pass along.
Well, totally. And look, I think what I always try to educate people is you really have to look at the company and the organization that you're asking to protect you as well. Let's look at, the foundational model companies, OpenAI, et cetera. What are they? They really are data brokers, right? They're going to collect any information that they can to train so they can they can sell a model out to everybody to use, right? That is their entire existence. So if you think about that, saying, hey, we have, ChatGPT Enterprise, right? OpenAI Enterprise, and they're saying we're going to protect your data, we're not going to use it. Do you really trust them to guard your data where their entire premise of their company is to resell data? To me, it's like the fox guarding the hen house, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So your controls have to exist outside of that.
God, I can't wait for that conversation after this podcast. But I listen to this podcast, what I've learned today. Well, that's awesome. I think final question that kind of I had, right? You've obviously done incredibly well. I mean, I'm sure we'll kind of over the next kind of few weeks and months, and everyone's going to see the growth. What's kind of next? Obviously, I'm sure it's of course going to be revenue, but is it going to be new geographies, new verticals, growth plans? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's what's been interesting is the very regulated industries have is where we really got our start. So think of defense, intelligence, healthcare, finance, et cetera. People that can't even dip their toe into it without the risk. I think what we're seeing is it's starting to catch up with everybody now, and we have to figure out, well, how do you go faster without the risk? So I think our goal is to really help ubiquitously across the industry. Obviously, for us, when you're building something, you start with a small list of partners to kind of build out the technologies, make sure it fits their operational business flows, et cetera. And so for us, what we're excited to do is start opening this up to the rest of the world, honestly, to bring them in. And, what's been interesting to me is even feeling the pull from even a consumer side of the world as well, is obviously my career has always been about helping the enterprise.
Yeah.
But you know what? This technology even has relevance personally. Like, if I look at, some of my family members, right? They use, the different models to review their healthcare information, their doctor's visits, their, X-ray images, MRI, whatever it happens to be. And you think about that, we're all leaking data personally, especially when, Elon will say, hey, use Grok as a second opinion for your healthcare data. Holy cow, that's scary because basically, guess what, guys? You've leaked all your sensitive data to someone that could use it to train a foundational model. So I think that safety even needs to exist on the consumer side as well. So for us, obviously we're always focused on helping enterprises, et cetera, but I think there's been a pull from all over the place for this type of technology.
It just shows how necessary it is, right? So this is obviously the time for Dimian. Look, last question or last point I always make on these podcasts is obviously our listener base is full of, like I said, VCs, CISOs, customers, or just kind of other people that are just really interested. If someone wanted to get in touch for a high level conversation or have a look at the product, whatever it is, where would you recommend they reach out to?
Yeah, come to our website, www.dymium.io, so DYMIUM. And there's links to reach out to us, and obviously, anyone can find me on LinkedIn and reach out to me directly. That's my favorite is, talking to people directly is always one of my favorite things to do. So, we would love to help. And, I think, a lot of where we actually spend time as well is helping even advise companies that are early on in their journey where maybe they haven't made their first step as well, to even come in and, give them advice on what we've seen and how we could help them and what missteps we could help them avoid too. So I would say, even ahead of it, even if it's early and you kind of just want to phone a friend on, hey, how can we think about some of these challenges we have? I think we also love that side of it. Not everything's about revenue and selling product. I mean, we are really here to try and reduce the risk around data and use of data, specifically around AI. And if there's anyone, we can help even kind of formulate a plan of where the company goes, we would love to help.
That's awesome. Well, look, we'll put all the links and everything kind of in the comments so people can easily reach out. But I'm very excited to see what the kind of next 12 to 18 months looks like, and appreciate you jumping on today.
Well, thank you, Rosie. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much.